Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Cryptids and Critters Paranormal. I'm your host, the Dooster. Today is February the 6th of 2024, and exactly 161 years ago today was the fall of Fort Hyman and Fort Henry over on the Tennessee River during the beginning of the War for Southern Independence. These two forts, as well as the one I'm going to discuss today, which is Fort Donelson, information is available in my book, A Ridge Too Far, The Saga of Colonel Cyrus Sugg. It is available on Amazon. It's also available from me directly at my bookstore, my Soggy Bottom bookstore. If you would like a copy, send me an email to ghosthunter911@gmail.com. That is ghosthunter911@gmail.com. And I will also put a comment at the bottom of this video where you can refer back to it if you want to. But anyway, in my previous video that I posted yesterday, we discussed Fort Hyman and Fort Henry on the Tennessee River. Today, I'm going to talk about Fort Donelson, which is located on the Cumberland River at Dover, Tennessee. Construction on the fort began in 1861, and its purpose was to defend the Cumberland River approach to Middle Tennessee and Nashville from Union invasion. The fort was named after Tennessee's Adjutant General Daniel S. Donelson. Fort Donelson was built on the west bank of the Cumberland River on a high bluff near Dover, Tennessee, and was situated in a superior position to control the river traffic on the Cumberland. It was located about 12 miles east of Fort Henry, which was located on the east bank of the Tennessee River. A dirt road connected the two forts. Located on a bluff overlooking the Cumberland River near Dover, Fort Donelson was originally designed to be an earthen fort with a water battery, and it included an adjacent armed camp for the garrison. After the fall of Forts Henry and Hyman, Fort Donelson was hastily expanded to defend against the growing threat of land assault with the construction of 3 miles of earthworks and additional cannon batteries. Workers from the Cumberland Iron Works near Clarksville were brought in to assist in the construction. Additional log huts and tenements were constructed to house the additional soldiers and officers. Confederate Commander Albert Sidney Johnston concentrated some 15,000 men to defend Fort Donelson against General Grant's army of 21,000 plus men and Andrew Foote's 6-vessel gunboats. Johnston originally wanted to give the command of Fort Donelson to P.T.G. Beauregard, but Beauregard declined the position because of a throat ailment. Instead, the responsibility went to Brigadier General John B. Floyd, which was a big mistake. Floyd had just arrived in Tennessee following an unsuccessful assignment under Robert E. Lee in Western Virginia. Floyd was a wanted man in the North for alleged graft and secession activities he was involved in while he was Secretary of War in the James Buchanan administration. Floyd's background was purely political, not military, but he was nonetheless the senior brigade general on the Cumberland River. Under Floyd's command at Fort Donelson were Brigadier Generals Bushrod Johnson, Gideon Pilla, Simon Buckner, and Colonel Gabriel Wharton. The garrison troops assigned to the fort were the 50th Tennessee Regiment, commanded by Colonel Cyrus Sugg, the 49th Tennessee Regiment, commanded by Colonel James Bailey, the 30th Tennessee Regiment, commanded by Colonel John Head, and the 1st Tennessee Battalion, commanded by Major Stephen Combs. The cavalry was commanded by the Wizard of the Saddle, also known as Colonel Nathan Bedford Forrest. My great great grandfather, William Eden from Macon County, Tennessee, along with his three brothers, they served in the 30th Regiment, and their efforts were instrumental in the construction of the fort. Like many of those stationed at Fort Donelson, he developed pneumonia from sleeping on the cold ground during the construction phase. Luckily, he and several more were medically discharged and sent home the day before the battle. He barely survived the ordeal and never completely recovered. Fort Donelson was considerably more formidable than Fort Henry, rising about 100 feet above the Cumberland River on approximately 100 acres of dry ground. This elevation above the river allowed for plunging fire against the attacking gunboats, a major advantage that Fort Henry did not have. The river batteries included 12 guns, which were 10 32-pounder smoothbore cannons and 2 9-pounder smoothbore cannons. These were backed up with an 8-inch howitzer, a 6.5-inch 128-pounder rifle, and a 10-inch Columbiad. There were also 3 miles of trenches in a semicircle around the fort and the small town of Dover. The outer works were bounded by Hickman Creek to the west, Lick Creek to the east, and the Cumberland River to the north. These trenches, located on a commanding ridge, and were fronted by dense obstacles of cut trees and limbs stuck into the ground. They were sharpened and pointed outward. These entrenchments were backed up by artillery and manned by Buckner and his Bowling Green troops on the right, with his flank anchored in Hickman Creek. Johnson and Pillow's troops covered the left flank near the Cumberland River. After the surrender of Fort Henry, Union forces cut the railroad lines south of the fort, severely restricting the movement of Confederate reinforcements and supplies into the area. In the wee hours of February 12th, most of the Union troops departed Fort Henry, where they had been waiting for the return of the Union gunboats and the arrival of additional troops that would increase the Union forces to about 25,000 men. The Union forces proceeded about 5 miles on the main road leading between the two forts, where they were delayed most of the day by a cavalry screen commanded by Colonel Nathan Bedford Forrest. Forrest troops, sent out by Buckner, spotted a detachment from McClernand's division and opened fire against them. A brief skirmish ensued until orders from Buckner arrived to fall back within the entrenchments. After his withdrawal of Forrest's cavalry, the Union troops marched unopposed the remaining distance to the Confederate lines of defense and covering any possible Confederate escape routes along the way. The Tennessee weather was unseasonably warm for February, and many Union soldiers, unaccustomed to the local weather trends, tossed their heavy coats and blankets along the way, thinking winter was over. Boy, were they badly wrong. This would prove to be a huge mistake on their part, and accounted for many of them freezing to death, suffering frostbite, and contracting pneumonia in the coming days when the weather took a turn for the worst and plunged into the single digits. The battle began on February 13th with a light rain ahead of a cold front. Strong winds dropped the temperature to 10 degrees. Before morning, the area was blanketed with 3 inches of snow. Guns and wagons were frozen to the ground. Soldiers could not light campfires to cook or to keep warm for fear of being spotted by sharpshooters in the area. And, keep in mind that these Union troops had tossed their blankets and heavy coats during the attack on Fort Henry and were now completely defenseless against the cold. At 1 a.m. on February 14th, Valentine's Day, Floyd held a council of war in his headquarters at the Dover Hotel. There was general agreement that Fort Donelson was probably indefensible and would soon fall into enemy hands. General Pilla was designated to lead a breakout attempt, to evacuate the fort, and to march to Nashville. Troops were moved behind the lines, and the assault was ready. But at the last minute, a Union sharpshooter killed one of Pilla's aides. Pilla, who was normally quite aggressive in battle, was unnerved at this and announced that since their movement had been detected, the breakout had to be postponed. Floyd was furious at this change of plans, but by then it was too late in the day to proceed further. Union General Wallace's brigade arrived from Fort Henry, and Foote's gunboats arrived shortly thereafter, bringing 6 gunboats and another 10,000 Union reinforcements on 12 transport ships. Foote's gunboats immediately launched an attack on the fort and was defeated in a pivotal battle with the fort's water batteries. Confederate gunners waited until the gunboats were within 400 yards to return fire. The Confederate artillery pummeled the fleet, and the assault was over by 4:30 p.m. Foote was wounded, which was coincidentally in the foot. The wheelhouse of his flagship, the USS St. Louis, was carried away, and she floated helplessly downriver. The USS Louisville was also disabled, and the Pittsburgh began to take on water. The damage to the fleet was significant, and it retreated downriver. It was stated that the metal decks of the gunboats were so covered with blood, it was so slick, it was almost impossible to stand. Now, of the 500 Confederate shots at the gunboats, the St. Louis was hit a total of 59 times. The Carondelet was hit 54 times. The Louisville was struck 36, and Pittsburgh was hit 20 times. Foote had miscalculated the assault and would have fared a lot better had he stayed further downriver and used the fleet's longer-range guns on the fort. 8 Union sailors were killed and 44 were wounded, while the Confederates lost none. On land, the well-armed Union soldiers surrounded the Confederates, while the Union boats, although damaged, still had control of the river. At this point, Grant realized that any success at Fort Donelson would have to be carried out by the Army without a strong naval support, and would have to resort to a siege on the fort. There was much confusion and discord among the Confederate command as to whether to stay and defend the fort or to evacuate. Then a decisive Confederate breakout attempt on February 15th that had fallen prey to command confusion when Floyd, Pilla, Buckner, and Johnston disagreed on whether to evacuate the fort or hold on to the Cumberland position. After all, they had successfully routed Grant's right wing in an early morning attack. What transpired next was one of the most controversial episodes of the war, and is the key to understanding what happened in the fall of Fort Donelson, what caused the fall of Fort Donelson. Meeting in a council of war at nearby Dover Hotel, Floyd, Pilla, Buckner, and Forrest assessed their situation. Pilla remained adamant about defending his native Tennessee soil. Buckner doubted the success of the fort against Grant's counterattacks. Floyd, the senior in command, hesitated and wouldn't even commit either way. When none of the generals could decide on a course of action, Forrest got up and stormed out of the meeting, vowing to remove his cavalry command from Grant's entrapment. Eventually, Floyd and Pilla, both wanted men in the North, knew if they were captured, they would either die on the gallows or face a firing squad if captured. They resolved to flee independently. Buckner agreed to remain and surrender the fort and the remains of the army. Forrest escaped with 1,500 horsemen and scattered infantry. Floyd and his personal 3,000-man brigade of Virginians, plus Pilla and his personal staff, cowardly left the garrison to its fate. The morning of February 16th dawned with both sides prepared to resume combat, when instead Grant and Buckner met to discuss surrender at the Rice House in Dover. Grant demanded unconditional surrender, and the bewildered Buckner complied. The Confederates were aghast, and the Federals were jubilant. Buckner ordered Colonel Cyrus Sugg to raise the white flag of surrender at the fort. Lacking a white flag, a white sheet was located and used as the flag. Loud cursing and swearing echoed up and down the riverbanks as the makeshift flag of surrender was hoisted up the flagpole. Excuse me. Although many escaped during the surrender proceedings, excuse me, his throat's getting scratchy. Although many escaped during the surrender proceedings, Grant telegraphed his superiors to report his capture of 12 to 15,000 prisoners, 20,000 stands of arms, 48 artillery pieces, 17 heavy guns, and 2,000 to 4,000 horses. Also, a large quantity of commissary supplies were captured. Further research revealed that his numbers were greatly exaggerated. Northern residents and Washington officials wildly celebrated the victory, but in the South, the unexpected news shocked Johnston. Nashvillians rioted and fled ahead of the advancing Federal troops. Forrest and his cavalry eventually reestablished law and order in the capital. Floyd and Pillow returned to Nashville and were officially censured for deserting their responsibilities. As the Fort Donelson prisoners traveled north for incarceration, Johnson concentrated his forces in northern Mississippi. Confederate soldiers captured at Fort Donelson were loaded into rail cars like cattle and sent to overcrowded, disease-ridden, rat-infested prisoner war camps like Camp Butler, Camp Chase, Camp Douglas, and Camp Morton. These prisoners, the ones that did survive the prisoner war camps, were actually exchanged 6 months later. Within weeks of the fall of the river forts, Nashville fell to Union troops, and the state government fled into exile. The deep wedge driven into Tennessee so early in the conflict subsequently introduced Union political and military reconstruction, as well as popular resistance, which guaranteed the volunteer state status as a battleground for the duration of the war. Despite several attempts in 1862 and 1863 to recapture the Cumberland position, the Confederacy never redeemed the losses. Above all, Fort Donelson vaulted an unknown and obscure Union general into prominence. The road to Appomattox and the presidency of the United States began for U.S. Grant at Fort Donelson. I want to thank you for watching. If you haven't already, subscribe to my channel, like it, share it with your friends and family. Like I said, this is covered in my book, A Ridge Too Far, available on Amazon or available from me. If you would like a copy, send me a email to ghosthunter911@gmail.com. That is ghosthunter911@gmail.com. And I will make sure you get a signed autographed copy delivered to your mailbox. I will put a link. I will put a link to my book site in the comments. And anyway, thank you for watching. If you haven't already, subscribe to my channel, like it, share it with your friends and family. Once again, this is the Dooster with Cryptids and Critters Paranormal, and I'm wishing you a great day. Thanks for watching.